So, hello guys, good morning. Unta, while watching sa akong video, okay lang mo kung asa man mo karon. So, kini akong topic is part lang gihapon ni siya sa chapter 2, which is sumpay ra pod sa una nga na report ni Winnie. So, ang akong first na topic is test and group membership. But before that, let us discuss some a short topic about Dr. Neil Christian Agarwal. So si Dr. Neil Christian Agarwal is nagbuhat ni siya og usa ka assessment tool that comprehensively accounts for all relevant cultural factors na magamit for diverse clinical settings with different populations. So, ang tool of assessment na iyang gigamit for his clinical practice is the DSM-5 Core Cultural Formulation Interview or CFI. So, CFI is consist of 16 questions and based on a very comprehensive literature review of 140 publications in 7 language. Mabasa po niyo siya sa libro, guys. So, if gusto niyo siya i-review, pwede kayo po niyo siya i-review. So, the data derived from a CFI administration can introduce clinicians to very fundamental ways culture and mental health interrelate. So karon ang CFI pod is isa ni siya sa mga best tools na ginagamit sa mga clinicians with regard sa mga culture assessment. So now, mo-proceed na ta sa test and group membership. Ang test and group membership is under ni siya sa culture assessment. So first, what is cultural assessment? So, culture assessment is defined as a process of tinkering that helps organizations differentiate between ideal culture and real culture. Also, it includes analyzing an organization's expectation, experience, philosophy, as well as the values that guide member behavior in an organization. So, test and group membership is test and other evaluative measures administered in vocational, educational, counseling, and other settings leave little doubt that people differ from one another on an individual basis and also from group to group on a collective basis. What happens when groups systematically differ in terms of scores on a particular test? The answer in a word is conflict. On the other hand, societal concerns about fairness both to individuals and to groups of individuals have made the answer to such questions matters of heated debate, if not lawsuits and civil disobedience. In vocational assessment, test users are sensitive to legal and ethical mandates concerning the use of tests with regards to hiring, firing, and related decision-making. If a test is used to evaluate a candidate's ability to do a job, one point of view is that the test should not just that regardless of the group members of the test taker. So, according to this view, scores on a test of job ability should be influenced only by job-related variables. So, in vocational setting or in vocational assessment daw, ang mga test users are very sensitive sa legal and ethical mandates when it comes to pag-hire, pagtanggal o pag-promote sa mga tao sa isa ka organization. Kaya kung ang test tools daw nagigamit is for the assessment lang for the capability sa tao for a specific work, so, dapat ang content or ang mga questions na naa sa assessment is taman ra pod sa kung unsa dapat ang i-assess ana na tools. So, dapat daw Ang score sa test of job ability should only be influenced by job-related variables. So, na ako'y example dito sa ako ang PowerPoint. So, score should not be affected by variables such as group membership, hair length, eye color, or any other variables extraneous to the job or to the ability to perform the job. Although this rather straightforward view of the role of test in personnel selection may seem consistent with principles of equal opportunity, it has attracted charges of unfairness and claims of discrimination. So, ngano kaha? So, test-related discriminations. So, to sum it up, through that test will emphasize that people differ from one another on an individual or group basis. But there is conflict when groups systematically differ in terms of scores on a particular test. For example, if the test that is administered by a specific company or agency can exclude specific attributes of a person, possible test-related discriminations will occur. So, example, a state police department may require all applicants for the position of police officer to meet certain physical requirements, including a minimum height of 5 feet and 4 inches. A person who is 5 feet and 2 inches tall is therefore barred from applying. So, isa ni siya sa ginatawag or isa ni siya sa example sa ginatawag na test-related discrimination. So, kadto tong ang ingon na kung kabalo man jud pud tanong ang hiree ay pag nag-hire og mga police applicants is naga-base jud sila sa heights. So, ang kani siya nga system is masulod ni siya or matawag ni siya nga mga test-related discrimination since ang mahitabo kay mahulog siya negative discrimination sa katong mga tao nga wala nakaabot sa 5'4" ang height. So, because such police force evaluation policies have the effect of systematically excluding members of cultural group where the average height of adult is less than 5 feet or 4 inches, the result may be class action lawsuit charging discriminations. So, beyond the variable of height, it would seem that variables such as appearance and religion should have little to do with what job one is qualified to perform. However, it is precisely such factors that keep some group members from entry into many jobs and careers. Consider in this context is observant Jews. Mga Jews kana mga Jewish dili ka ng Jews na atong ginainom. Their appearance and dress is not a mainstream. The food they eat must be kosher. So, kabalo man ta sa mga kanang mga Jewish no natagas jud kaayo na sila og mga sanina, which is sometimes pag ingana ang way sa ilahang sinuotan or ilahang appearance is kanang hassle good siya sa mga specific na works. They are unable to work or travel on weekends. Given the established selection criteria for many positions in corporate America, candidates who are members of the group known as observant Jews are effectively excluded, regardless of their ability to perform the work. So, naiubang mga work na available sa Amerika na dili sila nagadawat og mga pareha sa mga Jewish na tao no kay since religious sila, so if ever na ay mga travel na mga meetings tapos timing pud sa mga maybe schedule silang simba So mostly dito do sa mga American company, dili nila or gina-exclude nila ang mga under sa mga inani nga applicants. So that is why the process and the content of test assessment tool plays a relevant role in administering a specific assessment. The more efficient of the assessment, the more you can guarantee that you can have the accurate result that you wanted. So, maoto nun na ang process o ang content and variables sa usa ka assessment tools na gamiton is very important jud, since ang result na imuhang makuha ana is mao ang mahimong possible basis or additional basis para madawat or magdawat ta og isa ka tao. So diha na to ma-assess ang ilahang ability or mga capabilities sa isa ka specific work. So my next topic is the affirmative action. So this si affirmative action is mauni siya ang kumbaga ang solution sa mga test-related discrimination. So, affirmative actions refers to voluntary and mandatory efforts undertaken by federal, state, and local governments, private employers, and schools to combat discrimination and to promote equal opportunity for all education and employment. So, it also seeks to create equal opportunity actively, not passively. One impetus to affirmative action is the view that policies that appear to be neutral with regards to ethnicity or gender can operate in ways that advantage individuals from one group over individuals from another group. So, very understandable naman no kung unsa ang iyahang pasabot. So, I will not elaborate it diha na part. So, affirmative action is a policy in which individuals, colors, race, sex, religion, or national origin are taken into account to increase opportunities provide to an underrepresented part of society. So, maskin pag putot ka, Black Americans ba ka or taga-Asia ka, si affirmative action is kina-accountable gihapon niya. So kumbaga, kung unsa ang mga opportunity na madawat sa kani nga tao, maskin sakto siya sa height tapos ikaw is dili, same lang mo og opportunity na possible nga madawat tungod aning affirmative action. So next is psychology, test, and public policy. So few people would object to using psychological tests in academic and applied contexts that obviously benefit human welfare. Then again, few people are aware of the everyday use of psychological tests in such ways. So more typically, members of the general public become acquainted with the use of psychological tests in high-profile contexts, such as when an individual or a group has a great deal to gain or to lose as a result of a test score. In such situations, tests and other tools of assessment are portrayed as instruments that can have a momentous and immediate impact on one's life. In such situation, tests may be perceived by the everyday person as tools used to deny people things they very much want or need. So, tinuod yun nun kay, if ever, for example, gusto kay ka mo apply anak na company. Since naa sila yung mga assessment na ginagamit or ginamandate, then wala ka nakapasar during sa imong pag take sa test. So possible jud na maka-apekto kaayos siya sa imong one's life, kay it's either ma-disappoint or ma-discourage ka kay wala nimo napasar So usahay ma-perceive sa mga tao nga kanang mahimo siyang hindrance good. So even denial of educational advancement, dismissal from a job, denial of parole, and denial of custody are some of the more threatening consequences that the public may associate with psychological test and assessment procedure. So, members of the public call upon government policymakers to protect them from perceived threats. So, nanawagan ang mostly mga tao no na sa government na or sa mga policy makers na unta makabuhat og mga policy sa ilahang mga na-perceive na threats about sa mga ginagamit na assessment tools. So, legislators pass a law, administrative agencies make regulations, judges hand down rulings, and citizens call for referenda regarding prevailing public policies. In the section that follows, we broaden our view of the assessment enterprise beyond the concerns of the profession. Legal and ethical consideration with regard to assessment are a matter of concern to the public. So, next is the legal and ethical considerations. So, what is ethical and what is legal? So, what is the difference between law and ethics? So, law is the systematic set of universally accepted rules and regulations created by an appropriate authority such as government, either regional, national, or even international. It is used to govern the action and behavior of the members and can be enforced by imposing penalties. While the ethics is the principles that guide a person or society created to decide what is good and bad, right or wrong in given situations, and it regulates a person's behavior. So, law are rules that individuals must obey for good of the society as a whole, or rules due to be for the good of society as a whole. So, some laws had been relatively uncontroversial. For example, the law that mandates driving on the right side of the road has not been a subject of debate, a source of emotional soul-searching, or a stimulus to civil disobedience. So, law regarding sa mga about sa mga rules good sa road, like for example kung di ba ang nahibalan ako is ang rule diri sa Tagum, ang mga single motor o ang mga tricycle is nana sila sa right side sa road. So it is mandatory nga kailangan sundon na siya sa driver. So, all the rules of the road may be relatively uncontroversial, there are laws that are very controversial. Consider in this context laws pertaining to abortion, capital punishment, euthanasia. Euthanasia is mercy killing, and affirmative action, and the list goes on. Exactly how laws regulating matters like this should be written and interpreted are issues of heated controversy. So, too is the role of testing assessment in such matters. So, if about law about abortion, capital punishment, o mercy killing is very controversial, ingana po daw ka controversial ang rule sa testing and assessment. So, whereas a body of laws is a body of rules, a body of ethics is a body of principles of right, proper, or good conduct. For example, an ethic of the Old West: never shoot them in the back. Two well-known principles subscribed to by the seafarers are women and children live first in an emergency, and the captain goes down with his ship. The ethics of journalism dictate that reporters present all sides of a controversial issues. Just like any other fields, a principle of ethical research is that researcher should never fudge data. All data must be reported accurately. So, to the extent that a code of professional ethics is recognized and accepted by members of a profession, it defines the standard of care expected of members of that profession. So, in this context, we may define standard of care as the level of which average, reasonable, and prudent professional would provide a diagnostic or therapeutic service under the same similar condition. So next is the concerns of the public. So unsa ang concern o nganong na-concern ang mga public or ang katawhan with regards the usage of assessment tools. The assessment enterprises has never been well understood by the public, and even today, we might hear criticism based on a misunderstanding of testing. Possible consequences of public misunderstanding include fear, anger, legislation, litigation, and administrative regulations. Concern about the use of psychological tests first became widespread in the aftermath of World War I, when various professional as well as non-professional sought to adopt group tests developed by the military for civilian use in schools and industry, reflecting growing public discomfort with the burgeoning assessment industry were popular magazine articles featuring stories with titles such as The Abuse of Tests. Less known were voices of reason that offered constructive ways to correct what was wrong with assessment practices. So, ang gikabalak-an sa public na katawhan is sometimes daw ang usage sa assessment tools is nasobrahan, or siguro during that time is ginamanipulate pod sa uban nga nagamandate or nagagamit ani. So to wrap it all, sometimes public people or test takers tend to misinterpret the usage of psychological and test assessment by the government and other agencies, because it was perceived by those individuals who are not in the capacity to answer and understand as a discrimination. That's why most of the less known people choose not to take any test and result as a hindrance for their applications. So siguro no naapoy uban nagagamit sa assessment tools, basin ang assessment tools na ilahang ginagamit is kanang high standard ra pud kaayo. So those person na kanang walay capacity to answer it choose not to apply or not to test, ay not to take na lang any test kay tungod dili nila kaya. So mahimo na pud siyang hindrance para kunyari imbis ma-promote na ang isa ka employee, since na may mga assessment na ginapatigayon niya, wala niya napasar, so dili niya makuha ang promotions. Since most government agencies mandated psychological tests, public people was more become concerned. Because of it, the government and many other agencies collaborate to fix and improve assessment tools to make it more accessible for all. Since mostly daw sa mga government o mga private agencies is nagagamit na og mga psychological assessment tools, na collaborate ang government agencies o katong mga other companies or mga private agencies na maka-fix o maka-formulate sila og mas accessible na mga assessment tools na kanang makagamit pud ang kadaghanan. So diri na mo insert sila legislation o litigation. So first, what is legislation? So legislation is a process of making public policies, also defined as laws and rules made by the specific officials who have the power to form it. For example, a bill being considered by a legislature that will become law if enacted, or the entire body of such bills under consideration or already enacted as a law by legislature. So litigation is the process of taking legal actions or lawsuit. So fixing or resolving a dispute between parties in the court, actions such as filing a lawsuit or case. So naasa ko ang PowerPoint guys, tong mga legislation ug mga significance na nahimo tungod atong mga public concerns with regards sa mga assessment tools. So naasa ko ang PowerPoint. So next is truth in testing legislation was also passed at the state level beginning in 1980s. So the primary objective of these laws was to give test takers a way to learn the criteria by which they are being judged. To meet the objective, some laws mandate that the disclosure of answers to post-secondary and professional school admissions tests within 30 days of the publication of test scores. Some laws require that information relevant to a test development and technical soundness be kept on file. Some truth in testing laws require providing descriptions of: first is the test purpose and its subject matter. Second, the knowledge and skills the test purpose to measure. Procedures for ensuring accuracy in scoring. Procedures for notifying test takers for errors in scoring. And lastly is the procedures for ensuring the test takers' confidentiality. So, truth in testing laws create special difficulties for test developers and publishers who argue that it is essential for them to keep the test items secret. So, after na-address ang mga public concerns or ang mga concerns sa mga test takers, naapoy mga concern ang mga professional nga nagagamit sa mga assessment tools. So, the next is the concerns of the profession. After the concerns of the public was addressed, professionals also stated their concerns and formed committees and collaborative agencies. As early as 1895, the American Psychological Association, in its infancy, formed its first committee on mental measurement. The committee was charged with investigating various aspects of the relatively new practice of testing related issues and problems. In 1916 and in 1921, symposia dealing with various issues surrounding the expanding uses of tests were sponsored. It is Mentality Test 1916 and its Measurement 1921. In 1954, APA published its technical recommendations for psychological tests and diagnostic tests, a document that set forth testing and standards and technical recommendations. The following year, another professional organizations, the National Education Association, working collaboration with the National Council on Measurements Used in Education, now known as the National Council of Measurement, published its technical recommendations for achievement test. Collaboration between these professional organizations led to the development of rather detailed testing standards guidelines that would be periodically updated in the future years. Tungod atong mga concerns sa public people, no, is after to na resolve ang mga concern na pod sa mga professionals nga nagagamit sa mga testing assessment ang nabuhatan og pamaagi. So mga government agencies ug mga public agencies nag-merge sila para makabuhat og mga rules ug mga solusyon sa ilahang mga na-meet na struggle sa pag-update sa mga assessment tools. So katong ako ang mga nasulti kaganiha, mao to sila ang mga private sectors ug mga government sectors na nagtabang-tabang or nag-collaborate para mas mapanindot pa gyud nila ang mga assessment tools. So next is the test user qualifications. So should just anyone be allowed to purchase and use psychological tests? If not, then who should be permitted to use psychological tests? As early as 1950, an APA Committee on Ethical Standards for Psychology published a report called Ethical Standards for the Distribution of Psychological Tests and Diagnostic Aids. This report defined 3 levels of test in terms of the degree to which the test used required knowledge of testing and psychology. So, Level A is tests or aids that can adequately be administered, scored, interpreted with aid of the manual and general orientation to the kind of institution or organization in which one is working. So, Level B, tests or aids that require some technical knowledge of test construction and use of supporting psychological and educational fields such as statistics, individual differences, psychology, and guidance. Level C is tests and aids that require substantial understanding of testing and supporting psychological fields together with supervised experiences in the use of these devices. In general, professional standards promulgated by professional organizations state that psychological tests should be used only by qualified persons. So, ang makagamit or makadistribute lang atong mga psychological assessment tools is kadto lang yung mga na ay learnings or background about psychology. Furthermore, there is an ethical mandate to take reasonable steps to prevent the misuse of the test and the information they provide. The obligations of professionals to test takers are set forth in a document called Code of Fair Testing Practice in Education, jointly authored, sponsored by the Joint Committee of Testing Practices, a coalition of APA, AERA, NCME, and the American Association for Measurement, Evaluation, and Counseling and Development, and the American Speech Language Hearing Association. This document presents standards for educational test developers in 4 areas. So, first is the developing or selecting test, interpreting scores, striving for fairness, and informing test takers. Beyond promoting high standards in testing and assessment among professionals, APA has initiated or assisted in litigation to limit the use of psychological tests to qualified personnel. A psychologist licensing law designed to serve as a model for state legislatures, and it has been available from APA since 1987. So next is testing people with disabilities. Challenge analogous to those concerning test takers from linguistic and cultural minorities are present when testing people with disabling conditions. Specifically, these challenges may include transforming the test into a form that can be taken by the test takers, Second is transforming the response of the test taker so that they are scorable. And lastly, meaningfully interpreting the test data. The nature of the transformation of the test into a form ready for administration to the individual with a disabling condition will, of course, depend on the nature of the disability. Then two, some test stimuli do not translate easily. For example, if a critical aspect of a test item contains artwork to be analyzed, there will be no meaningful way to translate this item for use with the test takers who are blind. So, connection with the example na nahatag sa book, nag-search pud ko og kanang example sa mga assessment tools or assessment process or ways na ginagamit or gina-apply sa mga blind people. So naa dito sa ko ang PowerPoint, mabasa dito ang haptic intelligence test for adult blind. So next is the computerized test administration, scoring, and interpretation. Computer-assisted psychological assessment has become more the norm than exception. An ever-growing number of psychological tests can be purchased on disk or administered and scored online. In many respects, the relative simplicity, convenience, and range of potential testing activities that computer technology brings to the testing industries have been a great boon. Of course, every rose has its thorns. Access to test administration, scoring, and interpretation of software, despite purchase restrictions on software and technological safeguards to guard against unauthorized copying software, may still be copied. Unlike test kits, which